going to have our Attack for Industrial Control Systems lead, Jake Steele, kick things off.
How's it going? Welcome back from lunch. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about Attack for ICS. So we've come a long ways, as Adam mentioned earlier in his talk. We're finally on the full site now, moved away from that MediaWiki site, so really excited to be here. So first I'm going to jump into who I am. So I've been a part of the Attack team for a number of years, really focused on ICS. Originally I started on mobile, but jumped quickly over. I've been on it since the kind of original release of Attack for ICS, and since then I've worked on a bunch of industry projects, some of which like the Attack evaluations for ICS. It was our inaugural emulation. I graduated from George Mason here locally, for anyone that's from the area. And I included a bit about myself. So when this was, I guess, originally posted, a bunch of my friends all sent me the same message. I'm a collector of hobbies outside of work. So I debated with them back and forth a little bit. And we finally landed on, this is probably, what I really, more encompasses me. And, with this, I kind of figure might as well go along with it, kind of use this to represent myself. At first, I didn't really want to be put in a box to, in a meme format. But if I had to round this out, add a couple more hobbies in there, and that's kind of my main interest outside of work. So I'll dive into Attack for ICS and why do we need it. So really, the main focus of Attack for ICS is defining the critical infrastructure focused on those industrial sectors. We had enterprise attack, which really defined those upper level IT. And here, this is like a representation using the Purdue model, which is commonly used to represent in OT environments the different functional levels originally tied to manufacturing. So enterprise really defined a lot of those systems in the IT really well. And, if it weren't for that, we wouldn't be here. But as you started to go further down into the Purdue model, down to those lower levels of 1 and 2, the level of detail just wasn't quite to the degree that you might want to explain adversary behavior for OT protocols. This is where Attack for ICS came in. And we really focus on those lower level Purdue levels, describing the control of industrial processes, primarily focused on that level 1 and 2. And you may be asking, well, what's different about the different domains? Really, it comes down to the different motivations of adversaries for each one of these domains. And in ICS, it's kind of an interesting area because it's that interaction with the physical world. There's a lot of weird devices and protocols that aren't as well represented in those enterprise domains. But this is kind of the focus that we aim to describe. At the bottom here, you can kind of see this is really the timeline of industrial control system incidents and the main basis for Attack for ICS and how we went about creating it. So today, I'm going to be talking about one of our newest releases, and it's going to be coming in this October update. It's focused on assets, which has, for anyone that is familiar with the MediaWiki site and kind of our origins, this was something that was previously there, although we've gone through a big effort to really have a more rigorous approach at defining it. So again, why do we need assets? There are a lot of different industries that encompass the whole OT or ICS space. You can see here on the picture, this is the critical infrastructure sectors that are defined by DHS. There's a subset of these that we really focus on that industrial control and the ones that we try and explain in Attack for ICS. For each one of these, they have different assets and definitions, as well as concerns and their own naming for how they talk about the devices in those networks. And that's really the main focus. So how we went about defining assets for this new approach was first going back and doing the same thing that we do across Attack, really tying back to the CTI and diving deep into the same reports we use to develop the Attack for ICS domain. This was sort of like a survey like you would do for techniques, where we went through, looked for what assets were called out by name. And then once we had this long list of different assets that analysts called out, we started to refine it and use industry standards as a basis to talk about this and have a central definition, as well as, kind of combining when you have multiple standards, we kind of combine those definitions and really be able to describe it across the board. The main ones we focused on were 882, which is the OT guide to security by NIST, and then 62443, which is an industry standard for the ICS space. From here, we then had to perform some analysis to actually create the mapping between assets, these definitions and names, to different techniques. The way that we went about doing this is identifying core features of these devices that also relate to techniques. So really, to boil this down, we took what we knew of techniques and we saw how different features were required for that technique to be viable. So something like default credentials couldn't be possible if you don't have credentials or user accounts. We did a similar approach with the assets using like vendor documentation or especially our knowledge in the domain and mapped to those same features. From there, we used those two lists to combine and create a mapping between assets and techniques. And from there, we can kind of use it as a main tool to apply to a lot of use cases. So this is kind of the first look at what assets looks like on the website. It's very similar to a lot of other structures if you're familiar with ATT&CK. So at the top, we have main definitions. We have different pages with a new ID space of the AID. And then, similar types of pages. One thing I like to always call out is that originally this was part of the platforms tag on ATT&CK, but we've moved and graduated to this new format. Once you go to a page, here this is a data gateway. We really define some of those nuanced details, as well as call out different sectors. That's an important thing that as you're looking across all these industry sectors, we can highlight where this kind of originates from and how it may be used, as well as the related assets, which I can kind of describe similar to in a group page, you have related groups. But this is really focused on those devices, and potentially we can extend upon this by describing at a more nuanced level of, this sector defines a very specific version of it. For each one of these, we can provide different definitions. And then at the bottom, we have that technique mapping, which can be exported to Navigator for any of your other uses. So how do you go about using this? And in a lot of the work that I do outside of the ATT&CK for ICS domain management, I do a lot of work applying ATT&CK and using it in my projects. One of the things that we always end up doing is defining what techniques are possible for this different asset and how do you want to defend against them or understand that defense gap, potential failure analysis, or that threat modeling. All of these can be done. It's really, we've just kind of removed some of that initial work to put it into a category. And one of the big things that I'm excited about is being able to use this as a tool to really talk across industry. For a lot of these other sectors, they may be underreported and underrepresented when it comes to public reporting of these incidents. So we have a lot of electric sector stuff, and that there's definitely ones in the assets right now that are represented. But when it comes to smaller domains that don't have one of these major incidents, we can't necessarily always map to them. So this is a way that they can tie their assets in a same functional role to what we currently represent, and they can describe that risk to their leadership. So that's really one of the big things that I'm excited about. The next steps for this process is documenting more about between that asset and technique relationship, providing some more detail to in citations as well for why this technique is viable. I think for the most part in this baseline case, they're fairly straightforward, but really providing that detail is one of the main steps. And then engaging with the community, especially for those underrepresented domains. That's a big area where we want to hear from them and be able to engage and add that content so that we can help them with their goals. So the next big thing for this year was really applying applying industry standards to ATT&CK. And this is, I call that techniques, but it's also to mitigations. So if we jump right into this, if anyone is familiar with a program download, this is kind of one of those main configuration change behaviors. What it is it's that transfer of program logic between an engineering workstation and some sort of embedded controller. And I put this diagram here. Originally, we kind of described, and a lot of the CTI and threat reporting described this program download as kind of like that monolith of program transfer. With the application of industry standards, we looked into how these PLCs are designed and the protocols and languages that are used to actually communicate. From there, we were able to add more detail to this. So really talking about when a modification of a program versus the task list. So kind of splitting some hairs on that, but really describing that threat activity to a more accurate detail. The program download is really focused on that transfer between two devices, and then including detail about project file. So that's one way that we were able to really enhance some details in the ICS domain based on standards. From there, we applied this to mitigations as a way that we can actually relate to these ICS asset owners, and they may be familiar using 62443 or 853 currently in their environments. So this is a way that we can tie our mitigations over, and they can have an easy relation between the two and really understand what we're trying to talk about. So now the future, and some of this was hinted at by Adam earlier today. But one of our main focuses has been on improving that cross-domain capability between other domains and ICS. So in this case, potentially enterprise and ICS. And with that, there may be some sub-techniques that get added to the domain. So that'll be a big, exciting period. As well as continuing to adopt campaigns. Triton, which was a big incident, is the next one on our list. And then really focusing on expanding assets. That's kind of the main direction for our next year. And thank you very much.
So I saw some folks online getting as excited about assets as we are, so that's awesome. Really encouraging. And as soon as you start talking about connecting enterprise and ICS, my heart just warms up. So more than happy to have that conversation. If anyone didn't notice, Jake recently created an ICS channel in the Slack. So if you are interested in this space, have feedback and ideas. I know you have a more daunting challenge than we do. Enterprise is a little bit cleaner in the platforms, but the assets sort of chip away at that. I think we do have time for maybe one quick thought.
Sure.
Big kind of takeaway too is I think seeing your talk, you're modeling a lot of industry standards, a lot of prior work. What are the big objectives, and what are maybe some things the community can do to kind of help out with that effort in terms of feedback, additional, you mentioned maybe shortcomings that are just lack of CTI.
Yeah.
Are there any big kind of gotchas that you just want to share as a thing that can really help out this effort?
Definitely. Across the board, we're always looking for contributions. When it comes to the mitigations, we get some feedback on that, but it's always great to hear on how we can better apply it or other standards, especially for some of those other domains or sectors. So we've thought about including things like NERC SIP and other regulations that are more specific to individual sectors. That type of information would be great to hear from the community and whether that'd be useful. But
you might need to steal some of those ideas for more host-based traditions like standardization and regularization. Exactly. That actually, it sounds bureaucratic, but maybe pretty helpful. But thank you again. And this actually reminds me I owe Adam a gift as well later, but little token of our appreciation.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.